The translation device crackled, then went silent, then crackled again. Every representative in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council leaned forward at the same moment. 47 species, 47 sets of eyes, or whatever passed for eyes on their respective worlds, all aimed at the center podium. A single figure stood under the cold white lights, Ambassador Zara Venn of the Altari Federation. Everyone knew the Altari. They were the ones who mapped star systems no one else bothered to chart, the ones who knocked on doors instead of kicking them in. Zara herself had brokered 19 first contact agreements. No weapons, no blood, just words and patience, and apparently a lot of tea. But today, there was no tea. But today Zara stood at the podium with her blue hands gripping the railing like she was trying to keep herself from floating away. Her skin, usually a rich deep indigo, had gone pale, almost gray. Her jaw was set. Her eyes moved too quickly. The emergency session had been called with no explanation. 47 species had scrambled their ambassadors and generals to this chamber on 12 hours' notice. Nobody knew why, and that fact alone had turned the hall into a pressure cooker. Zara cleared her throat. "Fellow beings of the Council," she began, her voice running through every translation device in the room simultaneously, arriving in 47 different languages at once. "I come before you today because our exploration fleet has made a discovery." She paused. "On the outer rim of the galaxy, a new species." The room erupted. Those two words hit every representative like a shot of something electric. New species. Life was precious. Intelligent life was rare. Finding it was a gift. General Crane of the Draonus Empire did not share the sentiment, or rather, he shared a different version of it. The large reptilian warrior rose slowly from his seat, his red scales catching the chamber light, his yellow eyes fixed on Zara with the look of someone who already knew exactly where they wanted this conversation to go. Crane was twice the height of most beings in the room. His uniform was covered in campaign medals from 43 separate military operations. He wore them the way some people wear scars, not to remember, but to remind. "New species," Crane said, his voice a slow rumble. "Mean new territory, new resources. New systems to bring into the Empire." He looked around at his fellow delegates and smiled. "Excellent news." Zara shook her head slowly, deliberately. "No, General." Crane raised an eyebrow ridge. "You do not understand," Zara said. Her voice had dropped, not from fear, from precision. "These beings, they call themselves humans, and their world is named Earth. They are different. They are dangerous in ways this council has never encountered." A beat of silence. Then General Crane's officers started laughing. Not politely. The kind of laughter that happens when soldiers hear something genuinely absurd. An Altari ambassador warning the galaxy's most powerful military about a primitive outer rim species. They laughed until Crane raised one hand. Then they stopped. "Ambassador Venn," Crane said with mock patience, "but what precisely could one primitive species do to the Draonus Empire?" Zara did not answer immediately. She reached into her data console and activated the holographic projector. A planet appeared in the air, blue and green and white, wrapped in cloud cover, orbited by a pale gray moon. Beautiful. Familiar in the way some worlds are. "Let me tell you what we found," she said quietly. She had been there herself. Zara wanted the council to understand that. This wasn't second-hand. She had stood on that planet. She had breathed the air. She had looked humans in the eye, and she had come back afraid. "Earth is rich," she began. "Water, metals, organics in abundance. When our ships first approached, our sensors showed what appeared to be a young civilization, basic radio communications, small outposts on their nearest moon, and a neighboring planet." She shifted the display to show human cities from above, towers of glass and metal, grids of lights that turned continents into glowing circuits at night. They welcomed us. They were curious, warm. They sat with us for hours asking questions and answering ours. They were genuinely wonderful. General Crane looked bored. "Primitive friendliness means nothing, Ambassador." "No," Zara agreed. "Their kindness was not the problem." She tapped the console. The beautiful blue planet dissolved. What replaced it was history. Humans had been recording their own history for 5,000 years, in dozens of scripts and hundreds of languages, in stone carvings and scrolls and digital archives. They had documented everything. And the single most documented subject in all of human history, the thing that appeared in their libraries, their art, their legends, their science, their mathematics, their entertainment, and their nightmares, was war. For their entire recorded history, Zara said, humans have been in conflict with each other. Images cycled through the display, ancient armies colliding on dusty plains, wooden warships ramming in narrow straits, long lines of soldiers crouching in muddy trenches while the sky turned to fire, industrial factories producing weapons in quantities that strained comprehension, and finally, the mushroom clouds, 2 of them, white and terrible. They have never, Zara said, had a single decade of complete global peace. The chamber was quiet. Not one? Commander Lith asked softly. Not one. General Crane shifted in his seat. Many species have violent pasts, the Draonus themselves. Found peace through conquest, Zara interrupted. Bold, slightly rude, she didn't care. Others found it through diplomacy or exhaustion, through losing too much to keep going. She looked directly at Crane. Humans never stopped. She let that hang. Then she continued. In 5,000 years they have fought with rocks, with sticks, with bronze and iron and steel. They split atoms to make weapons, they engineered diseases, they designed poisons capable of killing millions in hours, they weaponized chemistry, mathematics, biology, their music, their art, and their very words have been used as tools of destruction. The images kept coming, era after era, innovation after terrible innovation. Yet they have weaponized everything. She stopped on one particular image, a human sitting at a desk, surrounded by books, a map on the wall behind him covered in lines and arrows. Nothing about the image looked dangerous. It looked like a scholar. This man, she said, wrote a text on military strategy more than 2,000 years ago. It is still required reading in every human military academy today. It has been translated into over 300 languages. It has influenced every major human conflict for 24 centuries, and its central lesson is this. She paused. Every battle is won or lost before it is fought. She let that settle. They do not think about war the way other species do. Other species think about war when war arrives. Humans think about the next war while they are still fighting the current one. They plan. They model, they simulate, they have entire government departments dedicated to predicting where conflicts will occur before any shots are fired. And then they position their assets accordingly. She looked around the chamber. When they welcomed us, when they asked their questions and poured their tea and seemed so wonderfully curious about the galaxy, they were also simultaneously assessing every tactical vulnerability we might represent, not because they are paranoid, because that is simply how they think. The council was silent in a way it had never been before. Impressive, Crane said carefully, but weapons can be countered. What you're describing is a species with a violent history. The galaxy has many of those. General, Zara turned to face him completely. It is not their weapons that make them dangerous. 1 second of silence. It is their minds. Zara had spent 6 months on Earth. She had visited their military academies. She had read strategy texts 2,500 years old, still being taught in active military programs. She had watched human officers run simulations of battles that had never happened, just to explore what might have happened if one variable had been different. They have schools dedicated entirely to the science of violence, she told the council. Not to practice it, to understand it, to perfect it, to analyze every conflict in their recorded history, extract the patterns, and make sure the mistakes are never made again. A holographic image appeared, a human military classroom, young people in uniform studying maps covered in arrows and symbols. They study war the way we study medicine, as a discipline, a craft, equations, probability matrices, resource allocation models. They calculate destruction mathematically. They have been doing this for millennia. They have thousands of years of data. She paused. But here is what I found most remarkable. Despite all of this, despite understanding war better than any species I have encountered, They choose restraint. She let that word settle. They have had the ability to destroy their own world multiple times over. They have chosen not to. Not because they cannot, because they have run the mathematics and understand that some weapons, once used, cannot be unused. She looked around the chamber. They are not mindless destroyers. They are calculating, patient. And they understand the cost of war better than any species in this galaxy, because they have paid it over and over for 5,000 years. The chamber was quiet as deep space. I asked their military commanders, Zara continued, what would happen if someone attacked their world. Crane waited. They said they would not merely defend themselves. They would find every ship, every base, every installation, every world connected to whoever attacked them, and they would dismantle that civilization piece by piece until nothing remained. She looked around the room one last time. And then they smiled. 3 days after Ambassador Zara Venn's warning, the Draonus Empire held its war council. Emperor Vortan's throne room was carved from black volcanic stone. Our red crystals in the walls provided harsh lighting that cut everything into sharp shadows. Around a circular table sat the Empire's most powerful military commanders. Vortan himself dominated the room the way a geological feature dominates a landscape, massive, ancient, and burning with the kind of ambition that never quite cools. Admiral Sorn stood at the display console, younger than most present, 60 years of warfare, 12 star systems conquered, not one major battle lost. The human home system, Sorn said, activating the star map. Outer rim, isolated, no major trade routes within 40 light years, no allied civilizations within 100. He pulled up reconnaissance images captured by long-range probes. Human spacecraft, primarily chemical rocket-based, largest vessels clearly designed for cargo. Their technology is at least 200 years behind ours. Their weapons are projectile-based. We found no evidence of energy weapons or shield technology. Commander Varric of the ground forces leaned back with contempt. They fight with bullets. Actual bullets. Laughter moved around the table. Their ground forces are conventional, Sorn continued. Infantry, mechanized armor, artillery. Nothing that would survive contact with our plasma weapons for more than minutes. He closed the display. Emperor, by any objective military assessment, these humans present no meaningful threat. General Crane spoke carefully. My Emperor, Venn seemed genuinely frightened. Perhaps we should investigate further before. Investigate! Vortan's voice was flat and cold in the specific way that carried a warning. You are suggesting the Draonus Empire should hesitate before a species that cannot even manage faster than light travel. Not hesitate, my lord. Only caution, Vortan said the word like it tasted bad, is what weak civilizations use when they cannot act. We can act, he turned to Sorn. What forces do you need? 300 warships, my Emperor. Standard conquest formation. 2 weeks for total system control. Perhaps 3. Vortan stood slowly. The room stood with him. Their population? 8 billion on the home world, another million in their outer colonies. Their resources? Exceptional. Metals, water, organics, the gas giants for fuel extraction. The asteroid belt alone contains enough rare minerals to supply our shipyards for decades. A long pause. Admiral Sorn, Vortan said, assemble the conquest fleet. 300 ships, standard configuration. He turned toward the viewport, looking out at the stars. The humans' world will fly our colors within the month. The War Council erupted, growls and battle cries. The Draonus had not had a proper conquest in over a year. The warriors were hungry. My lord, General Crane said one last time, standard protocol requires notifying the Galactic Council before action against a new species. Vortan laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Since when does the Empire ask permission to expand? The humans are not council members. They have no treaties, no protections. They are free territory waiting to be claimed. He turned back to the table. By the time the council finishes debating, Earth will already be flying our flag. Let them write their formal objections to a conquered world. Nobody thought about Zara Venn's warning. Nobody remembered the part about the smile. The small Altari scout ship had been running dark at the edge of the Draonus system for 11 days. Zara watched the shipyards through the long-range display, watched 300 warships being loaded, armed, fueled. She had tried everything: formal protests, emergency sessions, personal communications to every ambassador she trusted. She had even attempted to reach Emperor Vortan directly. That message came back unopened. Now she watched the fleet gather. As the 300 ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and vanished, a cloud of metal and firepower and absolute certainty aimed at one small blue world, Zara reached for her navigation console and set course for the Council station. Before she jumped, she opened a direct transmission channel to Earth's frequency. The Draonus jamming field hit it immediately. Her signal died. The humans would face this alone. She sat for a moment looking at the static on her communication screen. 5 seconds. 10. She was not the kind of person who allowed herself extended grief. There would be time for that later, or there wouldn't, depending on what happened next. She engaged her drive. Behind her, the stars were quiet. Somewhere ahead of her, 300 ships were moving toward a lesson the galaxy would remember for a very long time. What do you think is really happening here? Do you think the Draonus Empire made a mistake? Write in the comments. I want to know what you think. The Draonus conquest fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system like a wall of metal falling out of the void. 300 ships. They spread across the darkness in standard formation. Heavy battleships at the front, plasma cannons warming to combat temperature, carrier vessels releasing fighter craft, troop transports holding position at the rear. Admiral Sorn stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Empire's Claw, a dreadnought the length of a small city, and studied his tactical display with satisfaction. Report. Long-range scans complete, sir. Minimal activity around the third planet. Several orbital installations, a few dozen ships in the inner system. No major defensive response detected. Sorn nodded. Signal the fleet. Advance formation. Begin charging main planetary cannons. As the fleet moved through the outer system, his sensor officer looked up. Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the human vessels. How many ships are responding? 37, sir. Sorn blinked. 37. Yes, sir. Cargo haulers, mostly. A couple of mining ships. What appears to be a converted passenger transport. Sorn started laughing. Hard. 37 cargo ships against 300 warships. Put them on, he managed. I want to hear them. The main screen activated. A woman, human, simple military uniform, a name tag that read Reyes. She was seated in the captain's chair of a converted cargo vessel, weapon mounts bolted to civilian frames, and targeting equipment installed over storage displays. Her expression was completely calm. Not the calm of someone who doesn't understand their situation, the calm of someone who has already made their decision. This is Captain Reyes of the Earth Defense Force, she said. You have entered our territory with obvious hostile intent. You have 10 minutes to leave this system. After 10 minutes, we will defend ourselves. Sorn smiled. Captain Reyes, I command 300 warships. You have 37 cargo vessels. I suggest you consider your mathematics. Reyes looked at him for a moment. One corner of her mouth moved. Admiral, we tried peace once. That offer has a shelf life. She glanced at something off screen. You now have 9 minutes and 20 seconds. You dare. 8 minutes, Reyes said, and cut the communication. Sorn turned to his weapons officer. Target their flagship, main plasma cannon, 1 shot. The shot that came from the Empire's Claw had cracked the hulls of hegemony battlecruisers, a directed plasma discharge at temperatures that rivaled the surface of small stars. It struck Captain Reyes's ship dead center, and Captain Reyes's ship continued moving forward, as if nothing had happened. Sorn stared at his tactical display. Report. Direct hit confirmed, sir. His weapons officer's voice had changed register completely. Energy discharge registered, but the human ship shows no damage, none. Her hull signature is unchanged. Fire again, all forward batteries, multiple plasma cannons firing simultaneously. The human vessel moved through the barrage like it was moving through warm air. How? Sorn demanded. Unknown. Sir. His science officer was fighting to keep her voice level and losing. They are not deflecting or dissipating our plasma. They appear to be absorbing it. Admiral, At those temperatures, that is not possible. Then the sensor officer cut in. Sir, all 37 human ships are accelerating. Attack formation. Soren looked at the display. The human vessels were spreading across his fleet's approach vector in a pattern unlike anything in his tactical database. Not tight hegemony formations, not swarm patterns, something else. It appeared random. Then you watched it for 30 seconds and understood it was not. They were covering each other. Every gap in one ship's movement was immediately filled by another. It had the quality of doctrine internalized so deeply it had become instinct. All ships open fire, Soren commanded. Would overwhelm them with volume. 300 warships fired simultaneously. Space turned white. 24 of 37 human ships came out the other side, damaged but moving, still coordinating. Then they fired back. What came from their weapons was laughably primitive. Physical projectiles, solid metal slugs, no guidance systems, no energy fields. The first salvo destroyed a Draonus heavy battleship in 2 seconds. The slugs had been accelerated to significant fractions of the speed of light. At those velocities, mass itself becomes a weapon of staggering consequence. There was no shield technology in the Draonus fleet designed to stop that. Nobody had designed shields for physical projectiles, because nobody had imagined that anyone would bother with bullets when energy weapons existed. It seemed barbaric, and it was devastatingly effective. "Evasive maneuvers!" Soren shouted. The humans had already accounted for the evasion. The projectiles were not aimed at where Draonus ships were. They were aimed at where Draonus ships were going to be, calculated as if the humans had a complete tactical model of Draonus doctrine already running on their targeting systems. Every time a ship turned to evade, a slug was waiting in the path it turned toward. 3 more battleships died. Then the human ships did something Soren had never seen. One of the smaller vessels, a converted ore carrier, maxed its engines and aimed directly at the fleet's center. Full burn, past any safe threshold for its hull structure. Soren understood what was happening 3 seconds before it happened. 3 seconds was not enough. The human ship struck the formation center at a velocity that made its mass relevant in the way stars' masses are relevant. At the moment of contact, its reactor went critical, a deliberate decision made by the crew aboard, and the explosion channeled by the vessel's structure punched through the formation like a needle through cloth. 4 Draonus ships ceased to exist simultaneously. Alarms screamed. 74 ships destroyed, sir. His tactical officer's voice was the voice of someone reading information she could not yet believe. We have lost a quarter of the fleet in 28 minutes. Soren looked at the tactical board. The human ships were already regrouping, already covering each other's blind spots, already factoring the loss of their own vessels into the next formation. All ships, Soren said, flat, controlled. Emergency withdrawal. Jump to hyperspace, now. 226 ships entered hyperspace. 74 did not. Behind them, Captain Reyes's voice reached the entire fleet on an open channel. You had your chance to leave peacefully, Admiral. Tell your Emperor, if he wants Earth, he's welcome to try again. We'll be here. The return to the Draonus homeworld was the longest journey Soren had ever made. The Empire's claw limped in with hull breaches in 7 sections, 2 engine cores offline, nearly a third of its crew dead. When the fleet appeared above the Draonus homeworld, the sight was visible from the surface. The planet had never seen this before. Not in 600 years. Emperor Vortan received Soren standing, said nothing while Soren knelt and gave his report. Every word, nothing omitted. The silence afterward lasted a long time. 74 ships, Vortan said. Yes, my Emperor. Lost to 37 cargo vessels. Soren began to explain. Their technology was... Admiral. Vortan descended from his platform 1 step at a time. The Draonus Empire does not retreat. It does not accept defeat. It does not allow a primitive outer rim species to hand us the first military loss in our history. He stopped directly in front of Soren. We will not be sending 300 ships. A pause. We will be sending 800. The mobilization took 3 weeks. 800 warships, the largest military force the Empire had ever assembled in one place, Capital ships, carrier vessels with launch bays for thousands of fighters, troop transports carrying 2 million veteran soldiers, supply chains, medical ships, or engineering vessels. The complete apparatus of Draonus Dominion, everything aimed at one blue world. General Crayon commanded the ground forces. He had been quiet since the council session, quiet through the new war council, said nothing when the orders came. He prepared his troops. He was a soldier. He followed commands. But he kept thinking about Zara Venn's eyes at the podium, the way they moved, calculating and afraid. And he couldn't make himself stop. He had seen fear before. He had seen it in enemies who knew they were beaten, in civilians who watched his troops march through their streets, in prisoners being processed for assignment. He knew what fear that came from weakness looked like. It was small. It cowered. Venn's fear had not looked like that. Venn's fear had looked like the fear of someone who knew exactly what was coming for the people she was trying to protect. Not helpless fear. Informed fear. The fear of a doctor watching a patient refuse treatment. He did not say this to anyone. Admiral Sorn commanded the space battle groups. This time, no assumptions. He had studied every second of sensor data from the first battle. He knew the tactics, the kinetic weapons, the formation coordination, the suicide run. He knew what they were going to do. But one thought stayed in his mind as the 800 ships gathered. Wyatt Reyes sounded patient, not brave calm. Patient calm, like someone who knew something he didn't. The fleet jumped to hyperspace. 1 month had passed since the first battle, and Captain Reyes stood on the bridge of humanity's newest flagship, a vessel that had not existed 4 weeks ago. The Humanity's Resolve, built from the ground up for one purpose, sleek where the cargo ships were bulky, integrated weapon systems, engines that were not chemical rockets. Humanity moved differently under existential pressure. Long-range sensors reading the Draonus fleet, her navigation officer reported. 800 warships, all military class. Reyes nodded. Signal the fleet, defensive positions, activate the orbital platforms. She had written 800 on a whiteboard the morning after the first battle. Full mobilization, predictable response to the scale of that defeat. That was the number an enemy following Draonus doctrine would send. 800. Pretty close. What the Draonus scouts had missed, observing from the system's edge using passive sensors, was what humanity had done during the month between battles. 8 billion people facing existential conflict do not spend that month waiting. They spend it working. The orbital defense platforms had been joined by massive installations camouflaged as asteroids and debris, hidden in Earth's shadow and the asteroid belt and the gravitational nodes of the outer planets. Not reactive defenses. A prepared kill zone spanning the entire inner solar system, and in the void between the planets, in the dark between the rocks, in the shadows of moons and the long cold distances, mines. Not a random field, a network. Each device precisely placed, precisely timed, linked to a central targeting system designed to channel enemy formations into specific corridors. Corridors calculated specifically for Draonus tactical doctrine, because Reyes's team had spent a month studying every recorded Draonus engagement in the Galactic archives. They knew exactly how the Draonus advanced. Sorn dropped out of hyperspace with 800 ships and found a solar system that looked exactly as his scouts had reported, but felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. Like walking into a room where everyone has just stopped talking. He pushed the feeling aside. Advance formation, moved to the inner system. 11 minutes later, the first mine detonated, then the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth in rapid succession. Not scattered, sequenced. The explosions moving through the fleet formation from the flanks toward the center, striking precisely the positions where Draonus doctrine placed its highest value vessels. Mines, his sensor officer's voice cracked. The entire approach vector is mined. Sir, I'm reading thousands of devices. They are on every viable approach vector in the inner solar system. A pause. Admiral, placing this would have taken months. They did this in 4 weeks. 30 ships lost in the first 2 minutes, before a single human weapon had fired. Sorn issued evasion orders. The mines followed. Not literally. They were fixed. But as his fleet spread to avoid the known fields, new detonations began in the new positions, as if the mine placement had already accounted for the specific evasive patterns specified in Draonus tactical doctrine. As if someone had read the Draonus military manual and designed the minefield as a direct response to it. Then, the human fleet attacked. The second battle lasted 9 hours. Human vessels moved in coordinated groups of 3, each trio covering the blind spots of the others. Every formation Sorn ordered had a counter waiting for it. When Draonus ships formed up for concentrated fire, human vessels appeared at their flanks from impossible angles. When they tried to retreat, human ships appeared behind them. "They know our doctrine," his tactical officer said during a lull in the third hour. "Every formation we assume, they are ready for it. Admiral, they have been studying us." "Where did they get our doctrine manuals?" "From the ships we lost in the first battle, sir. We left 74 Draonus vessels in that system. They had 30 days to take them apart." Sorn stared at her. "They reverse-engineered our tactics from our own wreckage. From our wreckage and our communications, sir. They have been listening to our encrypted channels since the first battle. Our own communication protocols have been feeding them everything. On Mars, Draonus ground forces landed to find empty cities, infrastructure intact, buildings standing, streets clear, but everything converted. Doorways to firing positions, streets to kill corridors. Automated weapon systems embedded in walls, under floors, behind panels indistinguishable from ordinary building materials. Every human gone underground into tunnels that appeared on no survey map. Commander Varick's report to General Crayon contained words Varick had not used in 40 years of military service. "I have no training for this. I do not know what to do." The asteroid belt was worse. Draonus forces moved to secure human mining stations, the rich sources of rare minerals from Sorn's pre-war briefing. The stations appeared abandoned, equipment powered down. The first engineers moved in to assess the mining systems. The mining systems then activated. In a mining station, the fundamental tool is a mass driver, a system for accelerating extracted material to transfer orbits. In the hands of human engineers with a month to prepare, a mass driver is a railgun, a very large one, powered by a reactor, launching multi-ton payloads at significant fractions of orbital velocity. 12 Draonus ships were destroyed by ore processors before Sorn ordered all forces out of the asteroid belt. "They have turned their own infrastructure into weapons," his engineering officer reported, sounding personally offended. "Mining platforms, fuel depots, communication relays, water treatment facilities. I'm reading weapon signatures from water treatment facilities, Admiral." "How is that possible?" "Water, under sufficient pressure through a narrow enough aperture, sir, becomes—" She stopped, regrouped. "It becomes a cutting tool with more force than most of our conventional munitions. They pressurized the entire treatment grid, every pipe, every valve, every reservoir. When our troops forced entry, the systems activated automatically." Sorn stared at the tactical display for a long moment. "They prepared this in 1 month," he said. "Yes, sir. While building a new fleet, while designing new weapons, while analyzing our first engagement and developing counters to every tactic we had used." He looked at his engineering officer. "What else are we not seeing?" She did not answer, because she did not know, and not knowing at this point was terrifying. By the end of the 9th hour, Sorn had lost over 400 ships, more than half the fleet. He had not achieved a single military objective. He had not landed on Earth. Then his intelligence officer brought him something that made all of it feel like a preliminary. "Admiral, I'm counting more human vessels than we have accounted for, ships that were not here when we arrived. And sir, some of them are using Draonus faster-than-light drive signatures. From captured engines? They reverse-engineered our hyperspace drives. In 30 days, sir." Sorn sat down in his command chair, not from tiredness, from a need to think clearly. Zara Venn's words came back to him, not as memory, but as something he was experiencing. They study war so they can perfect it. They turn warfare into mathematics. He had almost laughed at that. "Order the remaining fleet to the outer system and hold position," he said quietly. "Then get me a channel to Emperor Vortan." Vortan's response to Sorn's full report was 3 words. "Come home, Admiral." The 6-day journey back carried a specific silence. The silence of people who have too much to say and no framework left to say it in. Soren stood at the viewport for most of it, thinking, not about tactics. He had processed those thoroughly enough. He was thinking about something else, about a woman sitting calm in the captain's chair of a converted cargo ship, about the mathematics of what had just happened. An 800-ship fleet, the largest ever assembled, and more than half of it was gone. He kept returning to the same question. How had they known? Not just the physical tactics, not just the minefield placement or the kinetic weapons or the infrastructure traps. Those were cleverness, and cleverness could be explained. What Soren couldn't explain was the coordination. The way every human ship seemed to know exactly what every other ship was doing without visible communication. The way they had anticipated not just what he ordered, but what he was about to order. The way the Mars defenses had been configured not for a generic enemy, but specifically for Draonus troop movement patterns. It was as if they had been preparing not for an invasion, but for a Draonus invasion specifically. And then it came to him. They had. That was precisely what they had done. They had studied the Draonus Empire, its doctrine, its history, its psychology, and they had built their entire defense specifically to dismantle the way the Draonus fought. Not a general defense, a targeted one, designed for this enemy, this fleet, these tactics, which meant they had taken the attack seriously before it came, which meant they had prepared before the first shot was fired, which meant that the calm he had seen on Reyes's face before the battle, when she had 37 cargo ships and he had 300 warships, was not bravado. It was honesty. She had known even then what the outcome would be, not because she was certain she could win, because she had already done the work. Soren finally understood Zara Venn's warning. Not as words, as experience. He finally understood it the way you understand things you have lived through, rather than merely heard. He finally understood the smile. The home world appeared on the viewport. Fires were burning in the capital, controlled, precise, targeting military installations, communication towers, weapons manufacturing facilities, residential districts intact, hospitals intact, schools intact. What was burning had been identified and selected with extraordinary care, and in orbit, no Draonus ships. 20 human vessels hanging in space between his broken fleet and the planet. Soren tried to call the Planetary Defense Center. The frequency was occupied, broadcasting a human message on all standard Draonus channels, calm and repeating. The planetary defense grid has been disabled. Draonus military forces are requested to stand down. Civilian safety is our priority. He set the Empire's claw on approach to the main spaceport. On his communication screen, Captain Reyes appeared. She looked exactly the same as she had before the first battle. "Admiral Soren," she said, "I'm glad you made it back safely. General Mercer would like to speak with Emperor Vortan. Can you facilitate that?" Emperor Vortan had not left the throne room since the fire started. He watched through the great windows as his military infrastructure was methodically removed from the map. No collateral damage, no civilian casualties. The precision was impossible not to acknowledge. General Crayon stood beside him, armor scorched, not yet ready to explain everything. "They were inside the palace," Vortan said. "The lower levels, yes, my emperor. Small teams. They used our own boarding teleportation technology from captured Draonus ships. They disabled the defense systems. They did not harm any of our personnel." Crayon looked at his datapad. "How many Draonus people were killed in the planetary operation, my emperor?" 3. All from a weapon malfunction on our own side. The humans did not kill a single Draonus soldier on this planet." Vortan was quiet for a long time. The communication panel activated without being called. A human face, older, gray-streaked hair, eyes that had seen a great deal and decided, having seen it, to keep going anyway. His rank insignia identified him as General Mercer of the Earth Defense Command. "Emperor Vortan," Mercer said, "I am currently on your home world. I believe it is time we talked." Vortan's claws found the edge of his throne. "You address me as an equal." "I address you as the leader of your people, the same way I'd want to be addressed." Mercer leaned forward slightly. "Your military is gone. Your fleet is broken. Your planetary defenses are offline. You know this. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Vortan was very still. Then why are you talking? Why haven't you begun the occupation? Because we're not here to conquer you, Mercer said simply. We're here to stop you from trying again. The silence in the throne room changed texture. Vortan sat down slowly. Explain, he said. Mercer activated a holographic display. Draonus space, all 50 star systems, red marks at every major military installation. We control all of these. Small teams with superior mobility and your own cloaking technology. We can hold them indefinitely or give them back. He let that register. Here is what we want. You will withdraw from every world you conquered. Those people get their homes back. You will reduce your warship construction capability to a level that cannot produce a force like this without our advanced knowledge. You will accept human observers in your system to verify compliance. He paused. That is the treaty. Vortan stared at the star map. And the alternative? You have 300 ships remaining. We have more than that in your home system right now, including vessels you don't know about. Mercer said it without drama. The alternative is that we do what you plan to do to Earth. We are capable of it. Vortan said nothing. But I don't think you'll choose the alternative, Mercer continued, because you are not a stupid man. You made a mistake. 2 mistakes. Attacking us and assuming that because we are young, we are limited. He looked directly at Vortan. Your empire was built by people who understood power. What I am offering is the chance to be the emperor who understood power clearly enough to know when the calculation changed. A long silence. Outside, the controlled fires burned their precise burns. Somewhere in the residential districts below, Draonus families were having dinner, putting their children to sleep, watching their government's communications, trying to understand what was happening to their world. Nobody had harmed them. Nobody had threatened them. The only thing that had changed was that the military infrastructure they had lived alongside their entire lives, the weapons factories, the command centers, the orbital guns, was gone. My people have conquered for 600 years, Vortan said at last. It is who we are. It is who you were, Mercer said. People can become someone else. It takes time. It takes help. We are offering you both. A pause. Ambassador Venn warned you before any of this started. I know you didn't listen. I understand why. It sounded like fear talking. But she wasn't afraid of us. He stopped. She was afraid for you. She was right to be. The formal surrender ceremony took place on a neutral orbital station 3 weeks later. Every species in the Galactic Council tuned in. What surprised everyone was the ceremony itself. No parade of defeated soldiers, no public humiliation. Emperor Vortan signed the treaty documents at a table, and General Mercer sat across from him. The terms were exactly what Mercer had described, and nothing more. No tribute, no territory, no claim on Draonus resources or allegiance, just peace, and the conditions required to keep it. After the signing, Mercer offered Vortan his hand. Vortan stared at it. Then he extended one massive clawed hand and Mercer took it. The image went across the galaxy in about 6 seconds. The weeks that followed were strange in the way only genuinely new things are. New human ships appeared in Draonus space, not as occupation forces, but as something the galaxy had no ready word for. Medical facilities on damaged colony worlds, human engineers working alongside Draonus workers on infrastructure repair, human teachers arriving with programs covering biology, environmental management, agricultural science, things the Empire had never prioritized because it was easier to take other people's farms than build your own. The Draonus didn't know what to do with it. Some were suspicious, some resentful. Some, particularly the younger ones, who had grown up hearing their civilization described entirely in terms of strength and conquest, found themselves confused in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. The worlds the Empire had formerly occupied watched all of it from a careful distance. On a world called Varak 4, a planet that had been under Draonus control for 11 years, its population reduced to labor assignments, its culture systematically dismantled, a human diplomatic team arrived 6 days after the treaty was signed. They brought medical equipment, agricultural advisors, Communication specialists who could help rebuild the networks the Draonus occupation had severed. They asked nothing in return. The people of Varak IV did not know what to make of this either. One of their elders, a woman who had survived the original conquest and all 11 years of occupation and 3 separate attempts by her people to resist, asked the human team leader directly, "What do you want from us?" The human, a young man who had apparently been on Earth during both battles, too far from a ship to fight, spending the war working in a fabrication facility making parts for vessels he would never see, looked at her for a moment. "We want you to be okay," he said. "That's it. That's all we want." The elder didn't believe him, not immediately. She had too much experience of powerful beings who told you what they wanted while taking something else. But she watched for 3 weeks. She watched the humans work, genuinely work, long days, physical labor, not management from a distance, and she watched what they accepted and what they refused, and slowly, over time, she began to understand that the young man had been telling the truth. It was not the most efficient way to rebuild a planet. Efficiency had never been the point. What do you think humanity's next challenge will be in this universe? And drop your best theory in the comments. I read all of them. And if this story hit you differently, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Ambassador Zara Venn was waiting for General Mercer in the corridor of the neutral station after the vote, 45-0, that formally recognized humanity as a major galactic power. "You could have destroyed them completely," she said. It wasn't an accusation, more like something she needed to say aloud to fully believe she had seen what she had seen. Mercer looked out at the stars through the station's long viewport. He was quiet for a moment, not searching for the right answer, but choosing which part of the answer to say out loud. "The Draonus aren't the problem," he said finally. "Conquest is the problem. We've seen what conquest does. We've done it to each other, on our own world, and more times than I care to count. It doesn't end. Someone conquers, then someone conquers the conquerors. The cycle runs for centuries, and everyone loses something they don't get back. But you had the power." "That's exactly the point," Mercer said quietly. "When you have the power to destroy someone and you choose not to, that's not weakness. That's the hardest decision any civilization ever makes." He started walking slowly toward the council chambers. "We understand the mistakes because we've made every single one of them. That's not a boast, Ambassador. It's just perspective. Hard-earned." Zara walked with him for a few steps. "The council is afraid of you," she said. "You know that." "I know. Even the ones who voted to recognize you. Even the ones who are grateful." She paused. The power you demonstrated, not just the military capability, but the restraint, it frightens people as much as the weapons do, maybe more." Mercer nodded. "That's probably appropriate. We should be frightening. The question is whether the fear makes people want to work with us or against us." He stopped at a junction in the corridor. "That's why we're not asking for territory or tribute. Territory and tribute make neighbors. What we actually need is partners, people who trust us enough to tell us when we're wrong." He looked at her. "People like the Altari, people like you." Zara looked at him for a moment. "I tried to warn you," she said, "before all of this started. I tried to warn the Draonus. I know, I read your council presentation. They didn't listen." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "But you kept trying anyway. That matters more than the outcome." He started walking again. "Come on, there's a lot of work to do." Zara followed him. She watched him go and thought about the planet she had visited, the people she had sat with over hours of honest questions, the military commanders who had described what they would do to anyone who attacked their world, and then smiled. She understood the smile now, the way you understand a story differently after you've lived through the ending. They were not smiling because they were certain of victory. They were smiling because they were certain the cost would be paid by the attacker, because they had calculated it, because they had been calculating costs like that for 5,000 years, and the math never changed. She walked back to her ship and filed her final report with the council records. Its last lines read, "We were warned. We did not listen. The consequences were significant, but they were survivable, because the species we underestimated turned out to be exactly what we were warned they were. Not because they were the strongest, Not because their weapons were the most devastating, but because they understood better than anyone that power without wisdom is a catastrophe waiting for a location. And they had decided, after 5,000 years of paying the cost, that they would not be that catastrophe. They carry their history with them. They know what they are capable of. They have seen it. They have done it. And they have chosen to carry that weight because it is the only way to remember why they must not do those things again. We should not fear them. We should listen to them. We should have listened the first time. There is a moment, in the weeks after the treaty, that doesn't appear in any official record. It happens on the Draonus homeworld, in a residential district of the capital that the human teams never touched. A neighborhood of ordinary buildings and ordinary streets and ordinary people who had nothing to do with conquest or war, who had simply been born into an empire and lived their lives the way anyone lives their life inside a system they did not build. A human engineer named Talus, young, maybe 26, from a city on Earth that had spent 3 of those 26 years under environmental collapse before human planners finally worked out a solution, is helping repair a water filtration system, not because it was part of the treaty terms. Because the system was broken, and the people in the neighborhood needed clean water, and Talus knew how to fix it. A Draonus child stands at the edge of the work area watching her. He's small, maybe 8 or 9 years old enough to have watched the fires burn through the military district from his window, old enough to be confused by the fact that the beings he was taught to fear are now, apparently, fixing his neighborhood's water supply. He watches for a long time. Then he asks, through the translation device clipped to his collar, in the awkward, halting way that children ask questions they've been rehearsing, "Why are you helping us? We tried to destroy your world." Talus wipes her hands on a work cloth. She looks at the kid for a moment. Then she says, "Because that's not something we do to children." She goes back to work. The kid watches for another hour. Then he goes home. Nobody records this. Nobody writes it in a report. It doesn't appear in Ambassador Venn's analysis or General Mercer's operational summaries or the Galactic Council's historical archives. But 40 years later, that child, grown now, an engineer himself, part of the first generation of Draonus citizens who grew up in a world without conquest as its central organizing principle, tells the story to his own daughter. And she tells it to hers. That's how the real history travels. Not through official records, through the small moments that people carry with them, because they don't have anywhere else to put them. The stars are quiet tonight above the Draonus homeworld. The fires are out. The buildings are standing. The people are still there. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, human ships run patrol routes nobody asked them to run, watching over a galaxy they did not conquer, protecting people who tried to destroy them, carrying 5,000 years of hard-earned wisdom through the cold of space. They smiled when they talked about war. Now you know why.